Welcome to the church library. Draw up a chair and join us as we sort through these stacks of old books. I'm Marissa Burt.
And I'm Kelsey McGinnis. And here in the church library, we host conversations about popular Christian books. This season, we are dusting off Christian parenting resources.
Our book, The Myth of Good Christian Parenting, How False Promises Betrayed a Generation of Evangelical Families, examines many of these books, the obscure, the bestsellers, the ones that still pop up in church parenting classes.
Let's see what's on the bookshelves today. Hi, Marissa.
Hi, Kelsey. It's so good to see you today. How are you doing?
Happy Monday.
Happy Monday.
We're recording. We never record on the same day. I wish I could kind of let people in on more of the behind the scenes stuff. This is we're not like the most regularly organized people with this thing. So it's
just whenever it fits in.
Whenever it fits in. Yeah. So happy Monday. We're recording on a Monday for once.
Yeah. And you guys just got back from vacation. Last time we recorded, you were headed out. How did everything go?
It was great. We go to Colorado every year with all of my sisters and their kids, and it's beautiful. Nice. This year we were all in the same house. We can't always make that happen because it's 19 of us all together.
Oh my goodness.
But this year we found a house that was absolutely perfect for everyone.
Must have been a huge house.
It was a huge house. It was so fun. But yeah, by the end of the week, we're all, I think all the adults are ready to go. The kids could have endless cousin time, but we're all like, I think everybody needs their own space now. But yeah, it was great. There's really nothing you can do to make an 11-hour drive there and back feel shorter for young kids, but you might have done it every year since they were born. And it always goes better than I expect. So we're glad to be back. And now it feels like summer's over, even though it's not really over. But
I know.
It's okay.
I know this whole season we've been pretty much recording it in the summer. So I feel like every time it's like the beginning of summer, the middle of summer. And here we see back to school looming on the horizon.
I know, which means the book is coming.
Which means
the summer's over. That means book is coming. It's almost fall.
We are gearing up, listeners, for the months leading up to a book release are like launch months. So there's a number of different things. As you've probably heard from other authors, pre-orders are super helpful for publishers and authors. So there's a lot of push to try and get the word out about pre-orders and try and pitch relevant articles or op-eds around topics and just try and reach people who might be interested in the book. So you'll be hearing more from us on that in our last episode of the season. But we'll have this conversation. I think we're going to do one more conversation next week that I think you guys will be excited to hear. It's an interview with the theologian Andrew Remington Riera. I'm super excited about that, talking about atonement theory in Christian how it shows up in Christian parenting. And then we'll have a final episode where we answer any last questions and sign off for the season.
Yeah. So stay tuned, everyone. More information about book stuff, book launch team, stuff like that. All that is coming. But first, we wanted to wrap up. So time before last.
Yes.
We talked about, when we talked about the pearls, we wanted to also talk about some other parenting and family life teaching in kind of fundamentalist circles, but there was just too much. There was too much to talk about with that book. And we decided to table that for now. So, for this episode. So we are going to get into some resources that if you grew up in or were ever a part of fundamentalist, maybe homeschool circles, you might have had some run-ins with. And probably the most name recognizable one is going to be Above Rubies. So we are talking about Above Rubies, Nancy Campbell, her husband, Colin Campbell. This is one I had not ever run into until we started researching for this book. So Marissa, can you explain what Above Rubies is and how you came to be aware of Above Rubies?
Yes. So I first came across Above Rubies as a young mom, I think. I think I came across just one of their magazines. They describe themselves as a ministry that's been around for 35 years to encourage mothers in their mothering vocation. And it's a free publication. It's produced globally, international markets, and they encourage readers to order multiple copies and leave them in different places like doctor's offices or at churches and things like that. So I think I came across a magazine at some point when I had very young children. And I was drawn to it because it was kind of has a crunchy vibe. And, I'm from the Pacific Northwest, so that tracks. Rubies does this interesting blend of crunchy attachment parenting vibes with authoritarian parenting and dominionism. They're an interesting blend. So I think for a lot of people, it was attractive because they talk about baby wearing, they talk about nursing and extended breastfeeding, they talk about some of the things that we'll talk about later in the episode that overlap with tradwife culture. They're kind of like an early tradwife influencer. So I think I found it curious and appealing because this is going to sound like a contradiction. It has a feminist edge because it elevates the work of mothering in a meaningful way on first glance. So I do think this presentation can be really attractive to people who are creative, industrious, have maybe shifted from a professional environment or education environment or something like that, and are thinking, how do I channel all of this into motherhood? And just moms looking for some support and encouragement. Nancy writes with that tone. She comes across with this really nurturing, maternal, I'm here to support women. Let's celebrate femininity and how God has created women. And then there's, I wouldn't even call them stowaway, because it's pretty overt once you get into it, that there's a lot of dominionist Christian nationalism. She talks about nation building, how mothers are nation builders. There's a lot of political ideology. There's a lot of reference of things you might find with Francis Schaeffer's type of teaching, like we need to reclaim culture in domesticity, kind of a hodgepodge. And they were very industrious. Colin and Nancy are very industrious. I think he's a pastor of some sort. He wrote a few resources aimed at fathers, but Above Rubies is almost entirely aimed at Christian women and mothers. It was incredibly popular in Christian homeschooling circles. It still is. I think you can look back on I don't know if it's an episode of The Duggars or like a separate series. There's a video series where Michelle Duggar wins a Mother of the Year award or something like this. And you see Nancy Campbell there in the background. So a lot of those same circles, certainly with Vision Forum, she was featured in a lot of those conferences and on that speaking circuit. And she still speaks at kind of national homeschooling conferences and things like that. And Above Rubies also has their own independent conferences. So there's a lot of directions we could take that. But I think most women are introduced, they're either recommended this, they come across the publication, or they come across it in their community. And then Above Rubies is this powerhouse of resources. They have a number of books, DVDs, magazines, and then all of their children, Nancy and Colin's children, some of them have their own little empires, like Trim Healthy Mama is Pearl and Serene's project. Some of the grandchildren have these kind of survivalist camp type thing.
Little empire and little sub-empires. It's really fascinating. They also have conferences, I've learned. There are a couple, it seems like still yearly, Above Rubies conferences, which are conferences not just for women, though. They're like for families. So even though the readership here is mothers, there's Colin and Nancy seem to be doing this together in a lot of ways and trying to shape families specifically. So Colin Campbell is the pastor of a church in Franklin, Tennessee, which I'll say, we won't go into detail here, but it is currently embroiled in some weird legal battles. You can go look, Julie Roy's, the Roy's Report has some, if you Google Campbell family church lawsuit, it's just a lot of drama there, a lot of relational drama, it seems. But yeah, so for 30 years, it's been a magazine, blog, podcast. Tell me about the books. What kind of books?
Yeah, so I have on my church library shelves The Power of Motherhood, What the Bible Says About Mothers, and The Family Meal Table and Hospitality. A big resource, I think it's called Be Fruitful and Multiply, and a DVD series on that too, because they are quiverful, kind of unabashedly so. But it's the blend of quiverful with crunchy openness, home birth, natural methods. So it's this very interesting mix. You don't necessarily come across it in other places. They're self-published resources. They come across, as so many of these do. We talked about the Pearl self-published resources. A couple weeks ago, we talked about the Ezzos, how they began as self-published. So too, Nancy's is kind of a thick resource. It's got homework. It's got fill in the blanks. And I want to read you some of the chapter headings because it really gives you a flavor. So mothers are God's idea. Mothers are womb men. Mothers are nurturers. Mothers are feeders. Mothers are servants. Mothers are exalted. Mothers are influential. Mothers are nation changers. Mothers are generation perpetuators. Mothers are teachers. Mothers are child trainers. Mothers are watchdogs. Mothers are joyful. Mothers are fruitful. Mothers are homemakers. Mothers are memory makers. Mothers are home builders. Mothers are prayer warriors. Mothers are revealers of God's heart. Mothers are missionaries. So there's a lot for mothers to do. And I think it can be an inspiring call to a kind of idealized view of motherhood. Even the title, The Power of Motherhood, notes that. And Nancy's approach is, I don't know if she would align necessarily with the nouthetic biblical counseling approach, but her chapters are essentially her concordance-based Bible studies. So she has looked up the usage of womb all throughout scripture and is going to kind of explain to you what all these verses about wombs mean and draw some principles from that. So I think it's really attractive to people who have a high regard for the Bible, because that comes across as very quote unquote biblical, as we talked about. Other resources are your kind of run of the mill, like the Family Meal Table, like a lot of prescriptive teaching about domestic life. And it comes with Bible verses and comes with a lot of expectation, a lot of things for people to do in a number of ways. And I think when you read the magazines themselves, you see many women, because they're reader contributor based. So Nancy will open it with kind of like a few articles maybe from her, but most people are writing in and telling their stories and saying, this is why this ministry has been such a blessing to them, and kind of talking about their own journeys into this ideology. And it's interesting to me because reading between the lines, it seems like many of them are women bringing their families into this ideology. I'm sure there's a number. We spoke with Tia Levings last week. So a number of instances where that's not the case, where a man is drawn into this, or the whole family kind of gets drawn into it because of church teaching. But I kind of wonder with Above Rubies, at least what they print, a lot of it seems like women are drawn to this and then kind of want their husbands to be spiritual leaders in the fashion that's described in these resources. And as a result, the kind of whole family comes in. But we have talked before about how similar this is to what we see sometimes in tradwife influencer culture. And I know you've done a lot of research in that area. What's your sense of how does this map, is it pulling on the same strings that appeal to people? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting how it's cyclical to me, like the attraction to these ideas, each generation of moms kind of looking for ways to make the work of mothering meaningful, and people who are trying to build a platform by selling those ideas often tend to go to the same well if they're like evangelicals or fundamentalists. And I think, Nancy Campbell above Rubies goes to this well of the world is a corrupting place. These are separate, holy, clean ways of practicing motherhood. And when I was reporting on Tradwives last year, I went back and found an old issue of Above Rubies from years ago with a little article in there about sourdough, about making sourdough from decades ago, right? And this is sort of like and I'm reporting on this a couple of years after the real like resurgence of sourdough as like a COVID hobby. And then all of a sudden you have interest in these tradwives who are doing it online. Above Rubies predates that, but you have a lot of the same kind of talking points about the goodness of homemade bread and the like toxic chemicals in store-bought bread. And, there was even a line in there that I think I used in the article about, singing the praises of this homemade sourdough bread, but also be sure not to eat too much because it won't be good for your waistline. There's sort of this like, it's also still your job to be like attractive for your husband. So it's just striking to me how similar some of the concerns and the themes were, looking back and then looking now. I think I always see Tradwife content as very fundamentalist in flavor because it is pitching a vision of domestic life that is set apart, that is offering this sense of righteous purpose and difference that I think people find really attractive and winsome and desirable, especially evangelical women who are expected to practice a form of motherhood that is holy, godly, set apart, etc. So I think getting to know Above Rubies as I was also looking at contemporary tradwife influencers. And I talked with Tia Levings about this as well. To her, she's just like, there's nothing new here. She sees this content online and just says, this is the same thing. I'm just watching a younger generation of women buy into the same ideas that were sold to me. They just have a slightly different aesthetic. The aesthetic has changed. It's updated for millennial women and now Gen Z women. But there are a lot of the same undertones, a lot of the same promises, a lot of the same fears that are being voiced by tradwife influencers. And so I see all of that there. And, it is a little bit disheartening. We talk a lot about recycling of ideas for resources on Christian family life. And, you see that happening in resources like this. And we've talked about those with parenting before, because once you read parenting books when you have young kids, you kind of don't do it again, right? Like this allows these books to basically be a lot of the same over and over again for each new generation, because each new generation has never read those books before. So I think the same thing is happening here. Although I do think that there is probably, and I could do more on this, but I am curious about when the first issues of Above Rubies, if they've been around for 30 years, so we're talking founded in the mid-90s, early 90s?
Yeah, I think so. I think early 90s, and really gained traction with like the Joshua generation, homeschooling movement, all of that. And I think you're really hit the nail on the head with like the repetition of the same ideas, because when I think about, they don't have, the ability to create a reel, but they do have pictures and word pictures. They do this via words, right? That's the family meal table in hospitality. You should use tablecloths because it's not that hard to wash a tablecloth. You should make this kind of a ritual for your family. And again, it takes, I think Tia mentioned this at the end of last week's episode, it takes what is benign. It's fine to love your home or to beautify your home. It takes it from that level of, here's something someone may prefer to do or may enjoy doing, to this is something not only that you need to do, but that makes your home more godly if you do it. And I think there's some bolstering ideas with Edith Schaefer and Susan Schaefer Macaulay, I think her daughter, that were in the water and appealed to a number of different people because it draws on ideals and longings, the myths we talk about a lot, a desire to make the home beautiful or make a refuge, and these things that are deep in our cultural imagination. We talk about a little bit in our book about how these ideals are really hearkening back to the Victorian era and idea about that being timeless, that women kind of oversee the hearth and home and men go out and earn a paycheck to provide and come welcoming back into this idyllic domestic sphere. So it's interesting to think about how it pulls on these kind of lasting myths, presents it as something that will please God, and also presents it as a recipe of this will cause your family and your children to flourish. Like this will protect them from the secular. I think Nancy talks about government schools a lot, right? Because homeschooling, it will protect them from the other that's a threat, and also help them pursue the good, build the Christian nation. You're a nation builder. You can, by doing this, change the course of the nation for Christ. So it pulls on a lot of motivations for people. Like all these resources, I think it often grabs people in a vulnerable moment. I don't think it's incidental that a lot of the people writing in and sharing their stories write in with stories about having a difficult season in their marriage. Often they're referencing abusive dynamics and they have a kind of conversion moment of some kind. And then they find that this recipe has, brought them peace or caused them to draw close together, something like that. And so I think that also is a really appealing myth for people, that this could be a solution to really difficult circumstances. And Nancy's quite unapologetic in making those promises and putting her family as an example of how it can work out. A number of them live on, they call it the hilltop in Tennessee, not far from where the Pearls live. And so the way they write about their life there, as with Christian influencers, makes it sound very lovely and attainable. And off screen, of course, you don't see the above Rubies helpers, the young women, teenagers who were sent to volunteer their labor to help Above Ministries run. They would spend summers there.
Can you talk about that? So what that is?
Yeah. So in the magazines, they invite this. It's like a ministry opportunity, and families who are all in would send their stay-at-home daughters. A lot of them were caught up in that ideology as well. So teenaged girls could go spend the summer on the hilltop. And one of them actually messaged me a couple weeks ago when I was doing questions, and I kind of asked her, well, do you mind sharing a little bit about your experience? And she said, sure, anonymously. And she said, they were there. They were involved in cleaning the Campbell's home and helping with the newsletters, helping answering questions, getting the magazines out to print. There were parts of it that were really fun, she said, because there's a bunch of young people around, because all of Nancy's children had a number of children, and it's kind of this acreage in Tennessee. So there were some fun elements, but reminded me of how IBLP young people describe Gothard's ministry opportunities, right? The labor of, in this case, teenage women was exploited to run the ministry and to run the household in some ways, because they were doing cleaning and helping with cooking and things like that. And so I say it as a pairing for influencers, because often Christian influencers have a number of people helping off screen as well to show how this could work for you. And meanwhile, I think Nancy's followers in particular, many of them are believing this single income idea, that it needs to be the father who's providing and the mother at home, needs to be quiverful. So the mother is constantly pregnant or nursing, needs to be homeschooling, needs to be baking bread, needs that long list of everything mothers are to be. So a lot of times they are trying to achieve these ideals in situations maybe where they're below the poverty line, but they can't accept government assistance because that's, frowned upon. They're, I mean, the ingredients sound suffocating when you line them all up, and the incredible pressure it put on families. And every once in a while, someone who really lived the above Rubies ideal will pop into my inbox. And not that long ago, someone did and said they were part of a group of young mothers who they were all in on this 20 years ago or so. And almost all of them have had broken marriages, stories of abuse, incredible long-term chronic illness, and the fallout of all of this stress, all of this pressure, all of these choices. And so I think that's the quieter story of this, because the magazine's still in print. The books are still in print. In recent years, Nancy has gotten even more political. Mm-hmm. They were at January 6th, the rally before. I don't know if they were at the Capitol, but very political as far as Christian nationalist vocal ideas. Activated, I think, by COVID, this corner of Christian fundamentalism, activated by things like masking and the vaccine and churches making an explicit stand against that. So yeah, a lot of overlap with a lot of different things. And as you mentioned, this sort of lifestyle wellness corner as well, because Trim Healthy Mama has reached secular audiences kind of beyond Christian fundamentalism. It started there as a self-published book, but they were on, I think, Good Morning America, maybe even, or some national media.
Yeah. Yeah. And which is just, it's so sad to me, because for Nancy Campbell to be pitching stay-at-home motherhood and single income existence as she and her daughters kind of spin off these ideas into their own little businesses is it's totally hypocritical in ways that I think are, I just don't think that's defensible. I have other things I could say about Trim Healthy Mama. That's a whole other.
I was going to say that intersects with your.
Yeah.
If we do another season on the work you're doing for.
Yeah. Maybe for a future episode on wellness stuff, we could do that one, because that's an example of Christian diet books pitched to women that I have a lot of other stuff to say about that.
Whole category.
It's a whole other thing. But I do think there's like one thing that, well, actually, before I say anything else, I'm curious because how it landed with you when you first found it. Because you said, altogether, it's a pretty heavy set of expectations for a mom. And so I'm curious, do you recall, like, when you first found it, what your impression was? Like, did you like some of at first, did you find it helpful or inspiring? At what point did you no longer
I'm
find
trying to remember, because this was
inspiring?
Before I knew anything about these corners, like Dominionism, right? So it really was like, a magazine where they're kind of talking about crunchy Christian parenting. So I think it kind of landed at that just level of interest. I found it interesting. It was different. I don't know, maybe a decade after, when I was researching for the novel I wrote in Dominionist groups, it came back on my radar again in a more significant way. And I understood more of what actually the ministry was and all of those connections. So I wish I could remember more clearly. It's hard to sift back through all that to think, like, what did, 28-year-old me think? I think I found in it a attractive way to make meaning of what was a hard transition to mundane responsibilities. Like, that's what comes to mind. Like, for me, people sometimes ask, like, which transition to how many kids was the hardest? 0 to 1 was the hardest. This kind of abrupt shift to being defined by motherhood in a little in certain ways. And I was in seminary at the time. My husband was in seminary at the time. So I think the idea that I could have some creative license to make beauty or meaning in different things was compelling, and I think makes sense and isn't problematic on its own, right? Like that there's a reason I think a lot of women are hungry for that, because you can do a number of things in your home or family that bring you delight or are exciting ways to use your skills and gifting. So I think it resonated with me there. And probably the ideas about like midwifery and baby care that were more attachment oriented, I think resonated. But it did line up. Oh, this is a way too. It did line up. I was, as a young mother as a newlywed at an Anglican church that adopted the Catholic doctrine of theology of the body and natural family planning. And so it had some crossover there that made sense to me at the time. And I think Above Rubies is a little unique in that sense, because a lot of Christian parenting books jump right in postpartum, right? Like after the child is here and maybe they're talking about toddler years. I think Growing Kids, Baby Wise is unique that they do baby care. Most Christian parenting resources, popular ones, don't really even touch on baby care, certainly not prenatal or ideas about contraception in Protestant circles. So I think Above Rubies is distinct in that. Around that time, I also read a book, someone gave it to us, called The Open Embrace. And it is a Protestant couple rethinking contraception according to Catholic principles. So for people who are familiar with fundamentalism and dominionism, they're like, oh yeah, I've heard quiverful forever. But I think for people in maybe mainline denominations or evangelical denominations, that was a new idea, right? Like, oh, maybe there's a conversation around contraception to be had that has some theological considerations. So
and that I think is making some of this popular with a new generation of Christian women right now, because I know and have spoken to many women younger than me who are getting married and think about having children, who are increasingly skeptical of hormonal birth control in ways that, like, I think they feel like millennial. I think even some millennials now feel like they were always told there was nothing to be worried about with hormonal birth control, and there's a whole like bubbling up. Actually, no, maybe this isn't okay. As there's kind of become more like science skepticism too. People are kind of questioning these, like, at this point, relatively older medications and methods. And weirdly enough, some of these women I know have been Anglican. I wonder if some of these are circulating more in Anglican churches. This is all anecdata, by the way. I have no numbers to back this up.
I think there's an Anglo-Catholic kind of crossover here. And certainly you find some overlap between Catholic teaching on contraception and quiverful teaching. There are distinctions, but there's some overlap, and there's certainly a whole trad-cath movement. So there's interesting overlaps, but it's worth noting because I think it appeals in different ways.
Right.
It's like we talked about last week, where Tia was saying, when you're leaving Gothard and you land at Doug Wilson's, it seems attractive because of all that's open, right? Someone who might not listen to, Gothard's ideas about contraception, or even Nancy Campbell's, you hear the way it was presented to me was like these kind of archetypal mythical terms. It was like wrapped up with like the Narnia books, and look at these the true feminine and the true masculine. So I think there are ways these different ideas become presented to people. And then you find something else that confirms that same perspective, and it is a sideways endorsement of a resource, perhaps. And I think it blends with real concerns, right? Like you're pointing out, like people are asking genuine questions, I think particularly as women's health becomes something more looked at. Like I think of this as a menopausal woman where, people are finally asking questions about this, and that involves hearing women's experiences. And so I think, women who are like, oh, these are ways hormonal birth control wasn't good for me, are open to other ideas. And these messages, like Nancy Campbell's messages that come with, not only is it maybe there are some physical considerations, there's this whole ideology of why it's not good for your soul too. So then I think, wow, that takes the conversation into a whole different level. Though they weren't only concerned with contraception, they also were really concerned with adoption. The Campbells promoted, I want to say this was in maybe the mid 90s. I wish I had a date in front of me. They were responsible for really rallying hundreds of families to adopt orphans from Liberia. And this was specifically designed with like a evangelistic missional impulse, kind of like, here's this situation in Liberia, this crisis and conflict. These children are in need. And also we could kind of save them. And it could be save them spiritually. Mother Jones has done a whole expose article on this, which maybe I'll link in the show notes, because many families bought into that. The adoptions didn't last, and people were unequipped for the level of trauma the children were coming with. As we've talked about before, many of the most high control Christian parenting resources have no understanding of attachment theory or child development. A number of families kind of dealing with the fallout of that. And of course, the children most dealing with the fallout of that. And so it's a complicated look at white saviorism, at colonial impulses, at the international adoption industry, at what do we do with the question of intention versus impact. But it's been memory hold a little bit. And so I note it here because, as we talk about a lot with these experts that are self-platformed, that are leading a bunch of people in a bunch of different ways, sometimes there's no accountability. Like that was destructive in the lives of a number of people, and yet it's simply not talked about. The publications continue. The shiny photos continue. The Facebook feed of Above Rubies continues with all the pictures of dreamy, gauzy motherhood. And to my knowledge, there hasn't been a meaningful attempt to address that in any way from Above Rubies or the Campbells.
Yeah, I'm sure this data does not exist. I'm so curious about the circulation size of Above Rubies. Like, if it's a free publication, they can kind of say whatever they want. They can just sort of send it around.
Maybe while we're talking, I'll look it up because I think they maybe have that on their website. But again,
I don't really trust.
How much do you credit that? It's like the Pearls being like millions of copies sold. You're like, well, maybe. They say the magazine currently circulates over 160,000 copies worldwide.
Interesting. I'm just looking now at their Facebook page has 117,000 followers. Which is not nothing. That's quite but. And like, I look at their posts and, they're like, people are engaging with the content they put out there. It's not like massive engagement, but it is active. Like, it's very active.
Well, and I think they used to have, maybe in the 90s, forums, but before social media, forums were really big. Like, we've talked about the Gentle Christian Mothering Forum. These were ways mothers were connecting around ideas. And I think they had some forums and newsletter type things, regional gatherings, maybe things like that.
Yeah.
And again, like with the Pearls, you can visit and learn from them. You can go to the conferences and meet them directly. And as a follow-up, after we talked about the Pearls, someone did reach out and say, yes, they still are active in ministry. They had heard them at a church not long ago, and they still have open visitors coming to their property to learn. So I thought that was interesting because we were kind of wondering, are they retired? Like, we don't know what's going on. And yeah, someone said, no, it's still very much active in certain communities.
And I well, and just to add to this, so Above Rubies is still active, and Colin Campbell, who is the pastor, I cannot remember the name of their church, but he also has this page called Meat for Men that he runs. It's like, what's the tagline? Challenging all men into uncompromising manhood. So there is an attempt here to really shore up gender essentialism, and I'm not sure what they would, I mean, gender hierarchy, certainly, and distinctiveness. And so I wish I could go back. Maybe I will try sometime. I'm curious about like the very first issues of Above Rubies in the 90s.
That would be interesting.
Because I think another through line that we haven't touched on that we could probably go on for quite some time about is the kind of anti-feminism of it all, the sort of like pitching based on feminism has failed you, which is a common theme in contemporary tradwife content as well, as the feminists lied to you. And in the 90s, I imagine that the tone was quite similar, actually.
Yes.
There are these moments where you have kind of like, I mean, the 90s, you have kind of third wave girl power feminism. And you know, I think that kind of shiny corporate feminism, people saw the cracks in that, or at least the cracks in like the commodified version of it pretty quickly, especially as, you know, moms in the workforce are kind of feeling torn in different directions, and you sort of feel like you're being told you can do everything. When motherhood in America is hard, and it's hard now. I think post-COVID, women are kind of looking around and saying, you know, I feel lied to. You know, parenting is incredibly difficult. And I feel like I was promised something that is not here. And then you have people like the Campbells or tradwife influencers saying, yeah, you're right. And if you can kind of operate in this, in your sacred feminine, in your feminine energy, you know, with a man who's in his masculine energy, that's how it's actually supposed to work.
Yeah.
You can fix this problem. You can solve that problem this way. And so when you mentioned earlier, you know, women who are maybe sort of in a hard moment in their marriage or in their family life, it's like, yeah, this is offering you a very like clear set of roles. Like, try this on. This might fix your problem, you know?
Yep. And I think you're right, because the same talking points you see with like a Joe Rigney or a Doug Wilson. I was reading something from Joe Rigney's Sin of Empathy this week, and he identifies feminism, like they all do, as a key villain here in the story, but also this interesting mix of lip service to the gentler sex and empathy and compassion of the gentler sex that needs to be reclaimed in the domestic sphere, but not elsewhere, because elsewhere it runs awry. And that's why women shouldn't lead in churches or in politics. And so I think it really tracked also with what you had in like the complementarian movement happening at the end of the 90s too, with like recovering biblical manhood and womanhood.
Yeah.
And some of the contributors there were overtly, like Dorothy Batterson, were saying like, this is very bad for society if women aren't at home as stay-at-home mothers. And so I think it was like a bunch of different messaging. And then the backlash against it included intelligent women articulating ideas that were anti-feminist. So like Mary Pride's The Way Home was big at this time too. And I think of Nancy Campbell similarly. They're intelligent women saying no to feminism in specific ways, and using all of their intelligence and effort to outline this other prescriptive way. And so they were doing that. I think you're right. We see it with tradwives. We see it with all dominionist teaching still. So in Doug Wilson's daughters do this quite expertly as well. And so it sometimes wears a little bit different clothing, but yeah, I think it's the same thing. But it would be interesting to read their early things. I think she's always been writing, though. They were originally Australia and New Zealand. I'm not sure which came first. They were Australia, they were New Zealand, then the Campbells came to the US. So they bring a little bit of that devout Australian, New Zealand corner of the world that I've come to think of a little bit more. Like when I was researching the Ezos, I found that that's an area of the world. The Ezos teaching is still very popular. And I know you've looked into a little bit the overlap here with the Newsboys
Yes.
group because they were connected. I know Rebecca St. James is from that. I mean, I think there's some charismatic devotion, evangelical impulses from Australia and New Zealand that is wrapped up in this, particularly for the Campbells.
Yes.
What did you learn about the Newsboys and the Campbells?
Well, so I did not know until you told me. So there's a ton of backstory here. You can go. So there's been a lot of scandal involving the Newsboys and their current, or I guess not current, previous frontman Michael Tate being accused of sexual assault, all kinds of misconduct. You can go Google that. Julie Roys, again, a lot of has published a lot of the reporting on that. Jessica Morris is the reporter. But the Newsboys have been owned by Wes Campbell for decades. And Wes Campbell is the son of Nancy and Colin Campbell, which I did not know until you told me. And I kind of went down the rabbit hole after you told me that and realized, that's a fascinating. They've had Michael Tate on their podcast, on the Above Rubies podcast. They've been quite close with members of the Newsboys over the years. And I do not think of the Newsboys, or at least I did not until recently, as particularly connected to these kind of fringe fundamentalist corners of the world. But it turns out it's incredibly connected. And like you said, I don't fully understand this subculture enough to know why this has happened this way. But as I was talking to sources for this story about the Newsboys, someone told me that one time Wes Campbell told him that Wes's plan was to introduce the Newsboys to U.S. audiences, make $1 million, and go back to Australia. He was sort of saying, like, there is this very entrepreneurial impulse here. Like, let's build a brand, let's sell it to American Christians, let's get out, And then he never got out. But the Newsboys have been incredibly profitable for decades.
I was going to say probably more than $1 million.
Yes, certainly more than $1 million at this point. And Wes Campbell basically copyrighted the name of the Newsboys, the band, early on, and has basically owned it since then. Peter Furler, the former frontman, so before Michael Tate, was a co-owner and gave up his stake in it after he left in the early 2000s. And since then, Wes Campbell has really been running it, I would say, like a traveling road show, essentially hiring the musicians who are the front-facing part of the band and him running the business behind the scenes in a number of ways. And apparently continuing to be involved in his parents' ministry in some way or another. It's unclear to me. I believe he is divorced at this point.
Interesting.
There's like a weird episode in his bio where, like, at one point he helped take down an out of control person on an airplane, saved a flight. I don't know. You can just Google Wes. There's all kinds of weird news stories out there floating around about this character. But anyway, there's a lot to say about him. But this is their son, and
is he their eldest?
I actually don't know. I don't know. I don't think so, but I could be wrong about that.
Isn't another son involved in the Newsboys too? Like both of them? Okay.
Yes. His brother was apparently their road manager for a time being. And one of his brother-in-laws, I believe, is also involved in the business here. So there's a real family business, build the family business streak in this family, and very much in the kind of Christian resources and media direction. The Campbell family, I had multiple sources, as I reported that story, multiple sources referred to the Campbells as a mafia family, using that word.
Interesting.
And, it's hard to know exactly what a person means by that, but they are very well connected. So I don't know to what extent Nancy and Colin Campbell are as well connected as Wes Campbell, but Wes Campbell is incredibly well connected in the Christian media sphere, not just in music, but also in Christian entertainment media more broadly.
Well, and they did all the God's Not Dead films, right?
Yes.
The Newsboys featured.
Yes. And that song has been an important part of their brand. We've mentioned the sisters who do Trim Healthy Mama. That's its own little media empire as well. And they are, relatively well connected. All of this is happening.
Profitable.
And very profitable. And all of this is happening, in Tennessee, which is a center of Christian media and entertainment. And so, I don't really know how to describe the overall influence of this family, except to say that it's surprising. When I would talk to people who I would not expect to be particularly connected to them, there's actually a pretty strong connection. And for that reason, it was actually kind of hard to get sources on the record talking about this family because, you'd run into someone. Maybe. Yeah, you'd run into someone who works for a company owned by so-and-so, or actually I work with this person in advertising. Like there are all these little relational connections because of how relatively small Nashville is in some ways when you work in Christian media, and nobody wants to be seen as a potential turncoat.
And how many children, in a certain sense, in a certain sense, this idea has worked for them as far as nation changing and child training. And so these are well-known, names with a lot of different connections. And, actually, Pearl, one of their daughters, was the very first person ever who has blocked me on social media. It's stuck in my head because this was years ago. This is probably, I don't know how many years ago, 9 or 10 years ago, 5 or 6, somewhere. I don't know. And she was recommending a Michael Pearl article. And there was only a little bit of pushback, of course. I was pushing back because I will always do that online. And as soon as I mentioned their family, she blocked me because I think it was interesting. Trim Healthy Mama, is presented as something separate. They're not very, they don't draw a lot of attention to the connection with Above Rubies. And so I thought that was interesting. And certainly ties into their vocal support, Nancy and Colin's vocal support of quote unquote the rod. Nancy recommends that I'm sure she would be in alignment with the Pearls, Michael and Debbie Pearl. I don't know if they're friends at what level. They are neighbors and in the same circles. And it sounds like they are friendly. But she makes a lot of promises about, wouldn't it be great if you can get your children will be a blessing to you if you get them to instantly obey, and your life will be better as a result. You as a mother, you can really enjoy mothering so much more, which is a tagline that shows up in the Pearls as well, and more fundamentalist resources. The idea being that you can kind of be a queen in your home and really enjoy all of that comes from it. And in one sense, I mean, sure, if you have volunteers helping you out and doing a bunch of labor in your home and I guess you have a short run as a queen for a few years there, and maybe that's appealing to a lot of women. But I wanted to note the emphasis on corporal punishment because it's strong in her resources as well for all the feminine nurturing things, not so much in the magazines, but once you read the books, she's quite clear on that.
Yeah, that, gosh. Again, this is the recycled ideas, because I think similarly, a point I want to make about tradwife content is that it succeeds because it sells that kind of ideal, peaceful, serene, aesthetic experience to moms. It is showing a mom, look at this beautiful potential thing. It's sort of like showing you what you want motherhood to have that. Feel like. You could have that. And when you describe this, like you can be a queen in your household, if you can cultivate instant obedience in your household, this is what motherhood will feel like. It was what it will be like to you. And that is when Ann Holbert calls James Dobson parent-centered, that's exactly what this is. It is centering the experience or the desired experience of parenthood and promising that you can get that. You can get this peaceful, in current context, this Instagram worthy experience of motherhood that you could record and put out there and people would want it. It's this desirable. And, rewind a couple of decades to earlier above Rubies, this like ideal, peaceful, children at your feet, quietly doing as you tell them to do. That was so, and continues to be.
Yeah.
So
with
appealing.
your fresh baked bread on your tablecloth, laden table, and all this hospitality. And it makes me angry when I see these things now, because at this point I have heard from so many of what the actual cost of that was. And it's such a betrayal, because the cost of that instant obedience is dehumanization of children. It's breaking the parent-child bond. It's violence in the home often. And whatever the picture, I think for a lot of people, it never achieved that picture perfect look. It's an impossible, especially for the people we talked about, it's impossible for the people to run in these traces and to really achieve this. But even for those who did, it's the incredible long-term cost, maybe for a year or two to be able to achieve that. Or I think it's Serene, they talk about one of the daughters in the Mother Jones article. Now Serene and Pearl are very successful, very beautiful houses they have built on this property. But before Trim Healthy Mama, they were in poverty, sleeping on the floor in a cabin without running water, with children going down to the well, kind of the grueling reality of this for many people. It makes me angry then when it gets dressed up, because it centers parental experience, like you said, which for Christians should give us all pause, as though not just this is attainable, but this should be about us. Like, is this what leadership is in Christianity? No, leadership is service, is the way Jesus says. It will not be this way of like you at the top with others below you, is not alignment with the way of Jesus. It is, he comes to serve. And the kind of idea of valuing and treating children from that posture is so at odds with this idea that says children are props, children are projects, children are political ends, like however the blank gets filled in. And it gets dressed up with all these Bible-y terms and Christian word salads, and it's so deceptive. And when I see it now in the new forms on social media, it is just hard. It is hard to know how do you respond? Like, how do you engage? Because it is appealing and it will betray you. And I'm thankful for the older women who sometimes do share their stories to say, not just did this promise not hold, but we carry a lot of regrets too of what it required us to do to try hard for this promise. And certainly from the adult children we hear from as well, who were raised under these things and can also testify to this was incredibly destructive in their own lives.
Yeah. It's every time I see it online, I find myself thinking of it as using your kids as props.
Yeah.
And to either sell the idea that you have an answer to parenthood that someone else doesn't have, or I'm not. I don't have anything to add to that. But I am hopeful that people seem to be becoming a bit more skeptical of influencer content that features children online. I think that is a hopeful move. Direction. But
yeah.
Again,
and I see there are even some trad influencers who will do that, like only the backs of their children. And I think that's a really good move in Gen Z and millennial. I think millennials are leading the way on that. And I think more as we hear from adults who were featured on mommy blogs or featured in YouTube channels as they speak about their experiences. Hopefully that there will be change around that, around child labor laws and other things as well. But
but there's always,
I think it still will be appealing in these communities. So yeah, I don't know. I guess as we close, I never know how to close these conversations because they're hard. But I just want to say probably the people listening to this episode of interest will have personal experience with this, I would think. And so I just want to extend like compassion to say, I'm so sorry that this was part of your experience, whether it was through being betrayed by these promises or through your family, your mother or father, going all in on this and how that had a repercussion for you. And I always appreciate when people want to reach out with their stories because it feels like such a privilege to even, I don't know, bear witness to that in any small part, because I know we only see a glimpse of it. We're looking at these resources, which, you know, people implemented them in different ways, but maybe it's helpful as people heal to note that the resources are objective testimony to the validity of what you endured. They record much of what you lived out in painful ways. So, yeah.
Yeah. I think that's a good way to close. There's always a market for aspirational parenting resources, it seems. And the next generation of parents will probably have their own too. But I still think it's worthwhile to revisit the ones and help people maybe make sense of the pressures they felt or the pressures their parents felt while they were raising them. So,
yeah, it's a lot for a lot of people.
Yeah, it is.
Anyway, we will next week. We will. I think it'll just be me talking with Andrew Remington Riera.
Correct.
Given scheduling things, and hopefully, if you're interested, I get a lot of questions about theories of atonement. Different theories of atonement, how this intersects with Christian parenting whenever I do reels mentioning that. So I'm so excited to have Andrew to answer some questions and talk about his book, The Lamb of the Free is what it's called. And then we'll close out the season with a final Q&A episode. So send us your questions. You can reach out on social media. You can send us a message through the fan mail feature on the podcast's notes, but we can't reply to that. So you could send us something and we can maybe talk about it on the episode, but we can't reply back to you. So if you want to engage with a reply, you can find us on social media, linked in the show notes.
Right. Well, it's always lovely to talk with you, even about hard things, unpleasant things.
Thank you. Thank you for the good conversation and all your insights.
All right. Thanks, listeners, for joining us. We will see you next time.
We are so glad you've joined us in the church library today. This is Marissa Franks-Burt
and Kelsey Kramer McGinnis. And if you liked what you heard here, we think you'll be interested in reading our forthcoming book, The Myth of Good Christian Parenting: How False Promises Betrayed a Generation of Evangelical Families.
You can pre-order it now wherever books are sold, and it'll be on shelves in October of 2025.